I want to do my few minutes of sharing with you an idea about our tradition that I think people have misconceptions about. I want to go to my topic for today about evil, and I want to connect the two. So, first of all, oftentimes when people talk about biblical religion, what they believe in, don't believe in, people take up kind of polemic structures, and one thing they talk about is animal sacrifices. They don't believe in animal sacrifices, which is a way to dismiss what I'm going to call the deep spiritual psychological idea behind the sacrifice, which, while I'm not, of course, recommending animal sacrifice, dismissing it leaves us off the hook. And I want to give you just a tiny little tale from counseling from some years ago and then read it on to something today. I once counseled a young man, well into his 30s, who, objectively speaking, was not a good son either to his mother or to his father, lived with an incredible amount of resentment. I put some of this at the feet of a therapist who colluded with him that he had a victim narrative and that his parents had let him down in some way. I've seen this many times before. And instead of what I would say giving this young man a mature understanding of life, meaning how old his parents were when they had him, their own immature unreadiness to actually raise this young man and his siblings, their stresses from their work, from their families. When he tried to understand his personal pain as a human being, the therapist, and I think this was a mistake, and again, I don't think this is indicative of most therapists, just this one person I think had an immature understanding of the world. Instead of laying the problem at, first of all, the feet of the human condition. We never get enough love. We never get enough wisdom. We never get enough goodness from the people that we want it from the most, and we think we deserve it from the most. Now, wanting something from somebody and deserving it from somebody are two very different things. Because when we feel we deserve something and we don't get it, we immediately put ourselves as a victim, meaning someone has not fulfilled a moral obligation of giving us something that we deserve. There's a moral element. Instead of a tragic element that life cannot get us what we need, we go into the victim narrative of people don't give us what we deserve, and therefore other people are at fault. So this person was not feeling better, not happy. There was estrangement in the family. Person was recommended to me. And as I heard the narrative, I heard, and you've heard me say this many times before, I heard a tragedy. I just heard people were not equipped, not qualified, maybe didn't have enough goodwill and wisdom to do what life, in some objective sense, required of them, and people muddled through. And when people are in pain and muddling through and not getting what they want and not getting enough from other people, I think we have two choices ahead of us, and I'm going to bifurcate this into two choices. And one is mature, face tragedy, and not make things worse, or blame and cultivate resentment. Now, there's a great gray area in between, but I've noticed the people that says, well, it was bad, and maybe it wasn't my fault, maybe it wasn't mostly my fault, but I'm not going to add to the tragedy with the resentment, my unhappiness. Whatever I owe people or don't owe people, I owe it to myself, to God, to other people, to try to make things better here. And if we ever get down into the details of getting apologies and rebuking, we'll get to it later. I recommend this person, but you ought to be an agent of transformation without focusing on your own victim narrative. This person's response was, well, how can I forgive seeing what they've done? And my response was, I never mentioned forgiving. I mentioned, if you'll excuse the term, growing up. Because resentment and blaming does not help maturity. Understanding tragedy, even when you are the victim of tragedy, can start in your own maturation process. And if some degree of reconciliation, forgiveness is in the cards for the future, that's to be talked about then. But what had inhibited this young man every single time from moving forward is, but look what they did to me. And by the way, from our perspectives here, it was truly almost nothing. When I look at the kinds of tragedy that many people in attendance today have suffered It would not even move the needle of tragedy from the perspective of both of our lives. I'm not saying there wasn't pain, but as far as objectively what occurred to a person was personally painful, but the person's pain was not matched by the degree of the wrongdoings. It was really a tragedy. Now, to get to the Torah portion, at a certain point, the person recognized that the person was dealing with people who were not worked out, who were immature, that this person had carried resentment their whole life and was impervious to wisdom. I had talked to this person many times over years, and every time I said the same thing, every time they went back, they either went back to the same therapist or found a new one because they weren't getting the answer they wanted. Finally, the person said, okay, I've done a wrong thing. I've done a really wrong thing. I've made things wrongs in my family for 2 decades. I was stubborn. I was resentful. I was blaming. None of these are the person that I want to be. And I feel terrible. I feel terrible that I've made things worse and I could have made things better. Now what do I do? That's where our Torah portion comes in. What do you do when you have a guilt to expiate? What do you do? Okay. Now, one thing is an apology. Of course, what nature of an apology? The person said to me, well, I'm ready to apologize. And my response is, you are ready to know that you owe an apology. You feel a little bit bad, which is good, but you still don't know what happened and your role in it. So you have a lot more work to do before you understand what kind of apology and what happened to you. Because what happened to you and what you were part of has been so colored by blame and resentment that now I'm going back to the Levitical mind. You are not permitted yet to offer a sacrifice because your own mind and spirit are so muddled. And the person said, well, when will I be qualified? Again, I'm now speaking in metaphoric shorthand of the book of Leviticus. When am I qualified to confess? When will I be qualified to apologize? When will I be qualified to make good? When will I be qualified, metaphorically, to offer a korban between me and God and a korban of restitution and so forth? And I said, I can tell you when I think, but I know you're not ready yet. Now, why am I sharing this with you? You see, we can say, well, I don't believe in animal sacrifices. And I can say, well, do you believe in guilt? Do you believe in expiation of sin? Do you believe in expiation of aspects of your own character that made everything worse when you could have done better if you weren't so entrenched in a victim narrative? Meaning, what do we do when we have a sin to expiate? Do we have a process? Now, I am not saying that animal sacrifice works because as we read from the book of Isaiah and others, many people had no internal sense of growth, but they offered a sacrifice and they thought they were good with God and good to go. And this is why many of the prophets, including Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others, hated the sacrificial system because it required no inner dimension. Okay, let's take out the sacrificial system. Have we made any progress in human expiation of the kinds of sins that I talked about today, which means dramatically not meeting the mark of what it means to be a morally authentic and accountable human being? What do we do? So what I'd like to talk about, not today, another time, is taking away the ritual dimension of animal sacrifice, which is to expiate a sin, and look at the internal dimension. What does it mean to be worthy of a confession, to be worthy of to make restitution, and not have it simply be the work of the lips and some kind of ritual? A person says, okay, fine, I'll apologize. I said, don't make it worse by saying, fine, I'll apologize. That is very, very, very far from what we're talking about. So my brief message for today on the idea of sacrifice. Yes, let's go ahead and reject the idea that an animal sacrifice expiates a sin. But I also want to reject the idea that an insincere apology expiates a sin, a wrongdoing. And I also want to reject the idea that that one cannot actually right things that have gone terribly wrong simply by mastering what happened enough that you feel like you owe an apology, but not actually going down into the depths of one's own shadows and see, number one, what one was doing, the damage you have done to yourself and other people, and how to create, to shape things so that one can actually go into the future. All right, that's my comment today, my Judaism 101 on sacrifice.